A missing parrot makes a surprising appearance in a classroom, leaving students and teachers speechless when it delivers an unexpected message. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The science classroom at Maplewood High School buzzed with the usual Monday morning energy. Mr. Peterson, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses, wrote biodiversity in our ecosystem across the whiteboard. The students slouched in their chairs, some taking half-hearted notes while others stared out the windows at the cloudy spring morning. Jake Thompson sat in his usual spot near the front, his Letterman jacket draped over his chair. As class president and star of the debate team, he normally paid attention, but today his mind wandered to the upcoming student council meeting. The monotony of the lecture shattered when a flash of vibrant blue and yellow burst through the open window. Chaos erupted instantly. Papers flew everywhere as a large macaw swooped around the room, its wings nearly grazing the ceiling fans. Girls screamed and ducked under desks while boys either froze or tried to catch the bird with their notebooks. Mr. Peterson dropped his marker, stumbling backward against the whiteboard. "Everyone stay calm." Jake stood up, using the authoritative voice that had won him numerous debate championships. A few students listened, but most continued their panic as the bird, its feathers a brilliant mix of tropical colors, circled the room with surprising precision. The macaw landed on the empty desk in the back corner, Tom Chin's usual spot. Tom hadn't shown up for class that morning, which was unusual for the quiet artist who never missed a day. The bird, seemingly satisfied with its perch, tilted its head and opened its beak. "I can't do it anymore," the bird squawked in a perfect imitation of Tom's voice. "They'll never understand." The classroom fell silent. Jake turned toward the bird, along with 23 other stunned faces. The macaw, which they would later learn was named Pip, continued its eerie recitation. "Engineering isn't me. The numbers suffocate my soul. Why can't they see the colors in my head?" Mr. Peterson approached cautiously, but the bird hopped to another desk. "I need to draw. I need to paint. Every equation feels like chains." Jake recognized these words. He'd heard Tom muttering to himself in the art room after school last week, but he'd been too preoccupied with his own activities to pay attention. Now, hearing them repeated by this bizarre messenger, they carried a weight he couldn't ignore. Ms. Sarah Williams, the art teacher, appeared in the doorway. She must have heard the commotion from her classroom across the hall. Her eyes widened at the sight of the macaw, but instead of adding to the panic, she stepped inside quietly and closed the door. "That's Pip," she said softly. "He belongs to the pet shop downtown. But how did he get here?" The bird continued its revelations. "Mom says art won't pay the bills. Dad says Chun men are engineers. But every time I solve for X, another piece of me disappears." Jake watched as Ms. Williams' face transformed from confusion to concern. She knew Tom well. He spent most of his lunch periods in her classroom, working on sketches he never showed anyone. Now, through this strange twist of fate, his private thoughts were being broadcast to everyone. The macaw's next words hit like a thunderbolt. "Maybe it's better if I just disappear. Nobody will miss the quiet kid who can't be what they want." A heavy silence fell over the classroom. Jake looked around at his classmates' faces, seeing the same realization dawn on each of them. Tom wasn't just absent, he was missing, and his last known thoughts, now revealed by this mysterious bird, suggested something far more serious than just skipping class. Ms. Williams approached the bird slowly, her hand extended. But before she could reach it, Pip spread his wings and launched himself back through the window, leaving behind a classroom full of shocked students and 2 worried teachers. The bell rang, but nobody moved. Jake stood up, his popular kid confidence shaken by the weight of what they'd just witnessed. He knew that whatever was happening with Tom, they couldn't ignore it. The bird's message had made sure of that. The hallway buzzed with nervous energy as students filed out of the science classroom. Jake remained behind, his usual confident stride replaced by purposeful determination. He watched his classmates whispering among themselves, some already treating the incident as fresh gossip material. But Jake couldn't shake the weight of Tom's words, delivered by that strange blue messenger. "We need to find him. Jake announced, stopping Lucy Chun, Tom's cousin, as she tried to slip past unnoticed. Lucy, perpetually hidden behind thick glasses and oversized sweaters, froze mid-step. "And you're going to help us?" Jake quickly gathered a small group. Mike from the basketball team, Sarah from debate club, and Lucy, who seemed to shrink further into herself with each passing moment. They huddled near the lockers, ignoring the warning bell for next period. "Lucy, when's the last time you saw Tom?" Jake asked, pulling out his phone to take notes. "Yesterday at dinner. He was quieter than usual, but..." Lucy's voice trailed off, her fingers fidgeting with her sleeve. "Our parents were discussing his college applications. Engineering programs." Jake nodded, remembering the bird's words about equations feeling like chains. "Okay, we'll split up. Mike, check the gym and sports fields. Sarah, take the cafeteria and library. Lucy, you're with me. We'll start with his usual spots." As the others dispersed, Jake led Lucy back to the science classroom. The room was empty now, with only scattered papers remaining from the earlier chaos. Jake moved methodically, checking under desks and between books, though he wasn't sure what he was looking for. "Wait," Lucy whispered, pointing to something in the corner near Tom's usual seat. A black sketchbook lay partially hidden behind a filing cabinet, its edges worn from constant use. Jake retrieved the book, hesitating before opening it. "Should we?" Lee nodded slowly. "If it helps us find him." The first few pages contained what Jake expected: detailed sketches of classrooms, students, and teachers. Tom had captured moments Jake recognized. The celebration after last month's basketball victory, Ms. Williams demonstrating brush techniques, even Jake himself giving a speech at assembly. The artwork was stunning, bringing static memories to life with just pencil and paper. But as they progressed through the book, the images grew darker. Engineering textbooks appeared as looming monsters. Numbers and equations transformed into chains and cages. The last few pages showed a series of self-portraits, each one more fragmented than the last. "Look at these dates." Jake pointed to tiny numbers in the corners. "He's been feeling this way for months." Lucy wiped her eyes behind her glasses. The last entry was yesterday. Jake turned to the final page and found a letter, written in hurried strokes. "To whoever finds this, I can't be their version of perfect anymore. Every sketch I hide, every canvas I abandon, it's like erasing pieces of myself. They want equations and blueprints, but I see the world in brushstrokes and colors. I'm sorry I couldn't be the son they wanted, the student they expected, or the friend anyone noticed. Maybe somewhere else, I can finally paint without fear." Tom. Jake closed the book carefully, his throat tight. He'd always seen Tom as the quiet kid who aced math tests and sat alone at lunch. Now, looking at Lucy's worried face, he realized how many layers they'd all missed. "He's not just hiding," Jake said, tucking the sketchbook into his backpack. "He's running from everything he thinks he can't be." Lucy nodded, her standing dawning in her eyes. "The bird, Pip." He was repeating things Tom said at the pet shop. Tom goes there sometimes to sketch the animals when he needs to think. Then that's our next lead, Jake decided, checking his phone as messages poured in from Mike and Sarah reporting no signs of Tom in their assigned areas. But first, we need to understand what these drawings are telling us. Each one is like a piece of a map, not to where Tom is, but to why he left. They spent the next few minutes photographing key pages from the sketchbook, Jake's mind already forming a plan. He'd built his reputation on being the guy who could handle any situation, rally any crowd. But this was different. This wasn't about winning votes or scoring points. This was about someone who'd been silently screaming for help through his art, while they'd all been too busy to notice. "We'll find him," Jake promised Lucy, seeing his own worried reflection in her glasses. "And when we do, things are going to change." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the school courtyard as Jake and Lucy made their way to the art supply closet. They needed materials for the search posters, but both knew they were also avoiding the crowds in the hallways. Jake, usually comfortable in the spotlight, found himself grateful for the quiet. "I don't get it," Lucy said suddenly, sorting through colored paper. "Why are you doing all this? You barely knew Tom." Jake paused, a stack of markers in his hand. The question caught him off guard. Maybe that's exactly why. I'm supposed to represent everyone in this school, but I didn't even notice when someone was struggling right in front of me. It's not just Tom who struggles, Lucy replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned away, busying herself with the paper cutter, but Jake caught the tremor in her hands. What do you mean? Lucy lined up a sheet of paper, measuring carefully. Everyone thinks being perfect is easy. Get straight A's, never cause trouble, make your parents proud. But sometimes, the paper cutter came down with a sharp snap. Sometimes it feels like you're suffocating under all those expectations. Jake set down the markers, really looking at Lucy for perhaps the first time. Her shoulders hunched forward as if carrying an invisible weight, her movements precise and controlled, just like Tom's drawings of his cage of equations. Is that why you always sit in the back of the debate club? Jake asked. You know all the answers. I've seen your papers. But you never speak up. Lucy's hands stilled on the paper cutter. My parents say women should be modest, not draw attention, focus on academics. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. At least Tom tried to fight back with his art. I just hide. Jake grabbed a piece of paper and began sketching out a poster design. Well, today we're done hiding. Both of us. They worked in companionable silence, creating posters that featured Tom's own artistic style, something Jake insisted would catch his attention if he saw them. Lucy's precise handwriting provided the details, Tom's description, when he was last seen, and contact information. As they finished the first batch, the door burst open. Madison Taylor and her group of friends stood in the doorway. Their perfectly coordinated outfits and practice sneers a stark contrast to the art room's creative chaos. Oh my God, Jake Thompson doing arts and crafts? Madison's laugh echoed off the walls. And with Ghost Girl Chin? This is too perfect. Jake felt Lucy shrink beside him, her body tensing as if preparing for an impact. He thought about Tom's sketchbook, about Lucy's quiet confession, about all the times he'd laughed along with comments like these because it was easier than standing up. Actually, Jake stood up, positioning himself between Madison's group and Lucy. We're trying to find someone who matters to this school, even if some people were too self-absorbed to notice. His voice carried the same authority he used in debates, but now it held something else. Genuine conviction. Madison's smile faltered. Since when do you care about the weird art kid? Since I realized that calling people weird just because they're different is actually the strangest thing anyone can do. Jake picked up a stack of posters. Now, either help us put these up, or get out of the way. The silence stretched for a moment before Madison stepped aside, her face flushed. As her group retreated down the hallway, Jake heard Lucy release a shaky breath. You didn't have to? Yeah, I did. Jake handed her a roll of tape. And not just because of Tom. We've all been playing parts we think we have to play. Popular kid, perfect student, class clown. Maybe it's time we stopped acting and started being real. Lucy's smile was small but genuine as she took the tape. Together, they gathered their materials and headed into the hallway. As they began hanging posters, Jake noticed Lucy standing a little straighter, no longer trying to disappear into the background. You know what's funny? She said as they turned a corner. Tom always said, art shows us who we really are. I never understood what he meant until today. Jake looked at the poster in his hands, at Tom's self-portrait surrounded by their words of concern and hope. Then let's make sure he gets the chance to show us more. They continued their work, each poster a small act of defiance against the roles they'd been assigned, each piece of tape securing not just paper to wall, but their commitment to finding Tom, and perhaps themselves in the process. The afternoon stretched into early evening as Jake and Lucy finished posting the last of their flyers around the school grounds. Their next destination was the local park where Tom often sketched, but the universe seemed to have other plans. A large German shepherd appeared at the school gates, blocking their path. The dog wore no collar and stood with its legs planted firmly, watching them with intense focus. Behind them, Mike and Sarah jogged up, having finished their own search routes. That's Rex, Mike said, keeping his voice low. He's been wandering around since the old Peterson farm closed down. Nobody can get near him. Jake assessed the situation. The main gate was the only viable exit. The side entrance was locked after school hours, and the back route would add 30 minutes to their journey. Time they couldn't afford to waste with daylight fading. Maybe we can distract it? Sarah suggested, reaching for her lunch bag. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of crinkling plastic. Jake remembered the sandwich he'd forgotten to eat during lunch, still wrapped in his backpack. He slowly unzipped the main compartment, the dog's eyes tracking his every movement. "Okay, here's the plan," Jake whispered, removing the sandwich. "I'll create a diversion. Lucy, you know the park best. Which path would Tom most likely take?" Lucy pushed her glasses up, thinking. "There's a hidden trail behind the old oak tree. He uses it to avoid other people when he's sketching." "Perfect. When I distract Rex, you three head for that trail. I'll catch up." Mike shook his head. "That's a bad idea, man. That dog's been aggressive with other students." Jake looked at the German Shepherd again. The dog's posture wasn't threatening. It was alert, watchful, almost as if it were guarding something. Or someone. "He's not aggressive," Jake realized. "He's trying to tell us something." He unwrapped the sandwich, breaking off a small piece. The dog's tail twitched. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, clutching her bag closer. "Think about it. Of all the places Rex could be, he's here, at the exact exit we need to take to reach the park. Where Tom might be." Lucy's eyes widened. "Tom loves animals." He used to sketch Rex from a distance when the dog first showed up in town. Jake took a careful step forward, holding out the piece of sandwich. Rex's tail wagged slightly, but he didn't move from his position. "See? He's not stopping us," Jake said. "He's waiting for us to follow." Slowly, Jake approached the dog, speaking in soft, even tones. "Hey, buddy, you know where Tom is, don't you?" Rex took the food gently from Jake's hand, then backed up a few steps, watching expectantly. Jake broke off another piece, and the pattern repeated. Rex would take the food, back up, and wait. "It's like he's leading us," Sarah whispered. The group followed Jake's lead, maintaining a respectful distance as Rex guided them toward the park entrance. The dog seemed to understand the importance of his mission, stopping occasionally to ensure they were still following. As they approached the park's perimeter, Rex's behavior changed. He became more energetic, his tail wagging faster as he led them past the main entrance toward a less traveled path. "That's the shortcut to the abandoned amphitheater," Lucy said. Tom mentioned it in his sketchbook. He said it was the only place where silence made sense. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows through the trees. Rex paused at a fork in the path, looking back at them expectantly. "We're running out of daylight," Mike noted, checking his phone. "If we're going to find him, we will," Jake interrupted, breaking off the last piece of his sandwich. "Rex knows where he is, and more importantly, he knows Tom needs help." The dog accepted the final offering, then turned down the darker path, his tail held high like a beacon. Jake looked at his friends, Lucy's determined expression, Sarah's concerned eyes, Mike's tense shoulders, and knew they were all thinking the same thing. Whatever they found at the end of this path would change things. "Ready?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. They nodded, falling in a step behind him as Rex led them deeper into the park. The familiar sounds of the town faded away, replaced by the rustle of leaves and their own quiet footsteps. Somewhere ahead, Jake hoped they would find answers, not just about Tom's whereabouts, but about all the things they'd been too busy, too afraid, or too comfortable to question before. The path narrowed, and Rex's tail disappeared around a bend. They quickened their pace, following their unlikely guide into the gathering dusk, each step taking them closer to whatever truth awaited them in the abandoned amphitheater. The abandoned amphitheater emerged from the gathering dusk like a forgotten monument. Concrete steps, cracked and weathered, descended in a semicircle toward a small stage area. Rex led them down the path, his nose low to the ground, until they reached the bottom level. Scattered across the worn stage were sheets of paper, Tom's artwork, instantly recognizable by his distinctive style. Jake picked up the nearest sketch, careful not to tear the dampened paper. It showed the amphitheater itself, but transformed into something otherworldly. In Tom's vision, the crumbling concrete became ancient ruins, and the surrounding trees morphed into watchful guardians. "These are recent," Lucy said, examining another drawing. The paper's still crisp, and he used the markers I gave him last week. Sarah gathered more pages while Mike circled the perimeter. Each piece told a different story. A self-portrait of Tom, dissolving into abstract shapes, the school building being reclaimed by nature, Pip the parrot perched on a branch made of mathematical formulas that were breaking apart. Look at how the style changes, Jake noticed, laying the pieces out in sequence. The first ones are controlled, precise, like he was still trying to contain everything. But these later ones, he gestured to the more chaotic drawings. It's like he finally let go. Guys, Mike called from behind the stage. You need to see this. They followed Mike's voice to discover a small alcove, partially hidden by overgrown vines. Inside, they found signs of recent occupation. A backpack propped against the wall, empty water bottles, and more importantly, fresh pencil shavings scattered on the ground. He was here, Lucy whispered, picking up the backpack. This is definitely his. Jake examined the alcove more closely. The walls were covered with chalk drawings, landscapes, portraits, and abstract patterns that seemed to flow into each other. In the center of it all was a larger piece that made everyone fall silent. The mural showed a boy, clearly Tom, standing at a crossroads. One path led to a city of straight lines and sharp angles, where faceless figures in suits carried blueprints and calculators. The other path wound through a riot of color and organic shapes, where artists worked at easels and musicians played beneath swirling skies. But Tom's figure in the drawing wasn't walking down either path. Instead, he was creating his own road, drawing it into existence with a giant pencil. Split up, Jake decided, his voice tight with urgency. Sarah, check the upper levels. Mike, take the woods to the right. Lucy, go left. I'll search behind the stage. He has to be nearby. As the others dispersed, Jake studied the mural again. Something about it nagged at him. Not just the imagery, but the technique. Unlike the other drawings, which showed Tom's struggle and pain, this one seemed different, more resolved. Jake! Lucy's voice carried across the amphitheater. Over here! He found Lucy standing near a maintenance path that curved around the back of the structure. Fresh footprints marked the damp earth, leading deeper into the woods. Those are his sneakers, Lucy confirmed. I recognize the pattern. He draws on his shoes when he's thinking. Jake pulled out his phone, using it as a flashlight. The beam caught more artwork. Quick sketches done on tree trunks with chalk, creating a trail of creative breadcrumbs. He wants to be found, Jake realized. These aren't just drawings, they're signposts. Lucy nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. The mural wasn't about being trapped between two choices anymore. It was about making his own path. And leaving clues for someone to follow it, Jake added. He texted their location to Mike and Sarah, then turned to Lucy. You know him best. What's at the end of this trail? Lucy studied the drawings on the trees, her expression shifting from concern to recognition. Each sketch is more elaborate than the last, like he's building up to something. Tom does that when he's working on a major piece. Start small, then gradually what? Create something bigger. Something that matters. Lucy pointed her own phone light further down the path. More chalk drawings emerged from the darkness, growing larger and more complex. He's not running away. He's running towards something. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Then let's find out what it is. They followed the artistic trail, their phone lights illuminating Tom's progressive work. With each step, the drawings became more confident, more purposeful. No longer fragments of fear and indecision, but steps towards something deliberate. Mike and Sarah caught up to them just as the path opened into a small clearing. There, in the last light of day, they found another wall, not of concrete this time, but of smooth rock face, nature's own canvas. And even in the growing darkness, they could see it had been transformed. The wall before them held the largest mural any of them had ever seen, and somewhere nearby, they could hear the soft strains of guitar music floating through the trees. The mural on the rock face was breathtaking, even in the dimming light. Unlike Tom's previous works, which spoke of confinement and struggle, this piece exploded with freedom. Colors danced across the natural canvas, transforming the clearing into an outdoor gallery. Jake moved closer, his phone light revealing intricate details. The painting showed the town of Maplewood, but not as it existed in reality. In Tom's vision, the rigid lines of buildings flowed like water. Trees grew through classroom windows, and students floated through halls that twisted like DNA helixes. Engineering formulas morphed into birds taking flight, and blueprints became butterflies. At the center of it all, a familiar blue and yellow parrot, Pip, soared between two worlds, one of structured order, the other of unlimited creativity. "He's been working on this for hours," said a voice behind them. They turned to find a girl with purple hair and paint-stained clothes leaning against a tree. Wouldn't let anyone help. Said he had to do it himself. "You've seen Tom?" Jake stepped forward. "When?" "About an hour ago. He was still adding details to the lower section." She gestured toward the bottom of the mural, where the paint looked fresher. "I'm Maya, by the way. This is kind of our spot, the local artists, I mean." As their eyes adjusted to the growing darkness, they noticed other figures emerging from the shadows. Young people with sketchbooks and cameras, some with instruments, others with spray cans and paintbrushes. This wasn't just a hidden corner of the park. It was an unofficial gathering place for the town's creative community. "We've been watching him all day," said a boy with a guitar slung across his back. "Never seen anyone paint with such intensity. Like he was finally letting something out that had been trapped forever." Lucy moved closer to the mural, her fingers hovering over a section where mathematical symbols transformed into musical notes. "This is what he's been trying to tell everyone. It's not about choosing between art and engineering. It's about finding a way to make them work together." "He talked about that," Maya nodded. "Said his parents see art and science as opposites, but he sees them as different languages telling the same story." A soft melody drifted through the trees again, clearer now. Maya's expression turned concerned. "He headed that way about 20 minutes ago, following the sound. Said something about finishing what he started." "The old echo point," another artist added. "It's where sound bounces off the valley walls. Some musicians come there to practice because the acoustics are perfect." Jake looked at his friends, then at the gathering of artists. "Can you show us?" Maya hesitated. "Look, we don't usually guide outsiders to our spots. These places, they're sanctuaries for people who need somewhere to be themselves." "I get that," Jake said, thinking about Tom's sketchbook, about Lucy's hidden struggles, about his own carefully maintained image. But right now, Tom needs more than a sanctuary. He needs to know he doesn't have to hide anymore. The purple-haired girl studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Follow me." "But just you and her," she pointed to Lucy. Larger groups tend to spook people at Echo Point. Mike and Sarah agreed to stay behind, documenting the mural and coordinating with the other searchers by phone. As Jake and Lucy followed Maya along a narrow path, the guitar music grew stronger. It wasn't just random practice anymore. There was a pattern to it, a message in the melody. "Tom used to play at home," Lucy whispered as they walked. "Late at night, when he thought everyone was asleep. He'd compose these beautiful pieces that mixed classical structure with modern emotion. But when his dad caught him once, he said music was a distraction from his studies." The path climbed steadily upward, winding between rocks and ancient trees. The music guided them, growing clearer with each step. Finally, Maya held up a hand, stopping them at the edge of a small plateau. "Echo Point," she whispered. "The acoustic sweet spot is just ahead." She pointed to where the cliff face curved inward, creating a natural amphitheater. "I'll leave you here. Some moments need to happen without an audience." As Maya melted back into the shadows, Jake and Lucy stood at the threshold of the plateau. The guitar music had stopped, replaced by a silence that felt heavy with anticipation. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, Tom was waiting, not running anymore, but preparing for whatever came next. Jake switched off his phone light, letting his eyes adjust to the natural darkness. A quarter moon provided just enough illumination to see the path forward. He looked at Lucy, seeing in her face the same mix of hope and uncertainty he felt. "Ready?" he asked, echoing his earlier question, but this time with a different weight behind it. Lucy nodded, and together they stepped onto the plateau, moving toward the source of the silence that somehow said more than any music could. The plateau opened before them like a natural stage, moonlight casting soft shadows across the weathered rock. At first, they saw no sign of Tom, but then a slight movement caught Jake's eye. Tom sat cross-legged at the edge of Echo Point, his guitar resting in his lap, silhouetted against the night sky. He didn't turn as they approached, but his shoulders tensed, showing he knew they were there. An old acoustic guitar, the one he'd hidden in his room for years, lay across his knees, his fingers still resting on the strings. "I knew someone would find me eventually," Tom said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the natural acoustic space. "I just didn't expect it to be you, Jake Thompson." Jake stopped a few feet away, carefully choosing his next words. "Your friend Pip made quite an entrance in biology class. Hard to ignore a message like that." A soft laugh escaped Tom. "Pip, I used to practice talking to him at the pet shop, telling him all the things I couldn't tell anyone else. I never thought he'd actually repeat it all." Lucy stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "We saw your mural, Tom. The one in the clearing. It's beautiful. It's honest," Tom corrected, finally turning to face them. In the moonlight, his expression was calm, tired, but no longer carrying the weight they'd seen in his sketches. "For the first time in my life, I created something without worrying about who would see it or what they'd think, without trying to hide the art behind the equations." Jake moved closer, sitting down near Tom, but leaving enough space to not feel crowding. "Your sketchbook, we found it in the classroom. I'm sorry we had to look, but we were worried. I knew someone would find it. Maybe I wanted them to." Tom ran his fingers along the guitar strings, creating a soft, incomplete chord. "You know what's funny? I've spent years being afraid of disappointing my parents, of not fitting in, of being seen as different. But sitting here tonight, playing music to the stars, painting what I actually feel, I'm not afraid anymore." Lucy sat down on Tom's other side, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "But why disappear like this? Why not just tell someone?" "Because I needed to prove something to myself first." Tom gestured to the valley below them, where distant lights twinkled like earthbound stars. "Everyone's been telling me who I need to be for so long that I started to believe them. I needed to find out who I am when nobody's watching. When there are no expectations, no disappointed looks, no subtle hints about practical career choices." Jake thought about the mural in the clearing, about how it showed two worlds merging rather than conflicting. "And who are you when nobody's watching?" Tom smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I'm someone who sees equations in art and art in equations, who can calculate structural integrity while designing something beautiful, who wants to build bridges that aren't just functional but inspire people who cross them." He strummed a full chord this time, letting it resonate against the cliff face. "I'm someone who thinks music and mathematics are different expressions of the same universal patterns." The sound echoed back to them, transformed by the natural acoustics into something larger than itself. Just like Tom's small acts of artistic rebellion had grown into something bigger than he'd planned. "The other artists at the clearing," Lucy said, "they understand this part of you, don't they? They showed me that being different isn't the same as being wrong," Tom nodded. "That there's a whole community of people who see the world in their own unique way." "But," he paused, looking at both of them, "why are you two here? Really?" Jake thought about everything that had happened since Pip flew into their classroom, about Lucy finding her voice, about his own realizations regarding popularity and authenticity, about all the masks they wore at school. "Because maybe we needed to learn the same lesson," Jake admitted, "about being real instead of just being what everyone expects." Lucy pulled her knees to her chest, nodding. "And because you're not the only one who's been hiding, Tom. You're just the first one brave enough to stop." Tom considered this, then stood up, slinging his guitar across his back. "So, what happens now? I can't go back to pretending." "I won't." Jake and Lucy stood with him, forming a small triangle under the moon. "You don't have to," Jake said, "but you don't have to face everything alone either. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't running away or standing alone, it's letting other people stand with you." The night air hummed with possibility as they stood there. Three very different people united by the simple truth Tom had painted on the rock face below. That authenticity isn't about choosing between who you are and who others want you to be. It's about finding the courage to be all of yourself, even when that doesn't fit into neat categories. I need to show them, Tom said finally. My parents, the school, everyone. Not just tell them, but show them what I see. Jake smiled, an idea forming. I think I know how we could do that. The next morning, Maplewood High School buzzed with unusual energy. Jake had spent half the night texting, making calls, and coordinating with what seemed like half the town. Now, as students streamed into the central courtyard for their usual morning gathering, they found something unexpected. The concrete space had been transformed overnight. Easels displayed Tom's artwork in a carefully curated progression, from his earliest technical drawings that merged architecture with art, to his recent pieces showing the fusion of science and creativity. The local artists from Echo Point had helped arrange everything, adding their own works that complemented Tom's vision. Maya and her crew had set up speakers, the morning air filled with recordings of Tom's original compositions, pieces that wove classical structure with contemporary emotion. Each song corresponded to a specific artwork, creating a multimedia experience that stopped students in their tracks. "They're actually looking," Lucy whispered, standing beside Jake near the main entrance. "Really looking, not just walking by." Jake nodded, watching as clusters of students gathered around different pieces, pointing and discussing. Even the popular crowd, who normally wouldn't be caught dead showing interest in art, seemed genuinely engaged. "Has anyone called his parents?" Jake asked, checking his phone for the 100th time. "Did better than that." Sarah jogged up, slightly out of breath. "Got hold of his mom at the hospital. She's on her shift, but coming straight here. His dad's driving back from his conference early. They should both arrive in about 20 minutes." The crowd in the courtyard grew larger as more students arrived. The principal, Dr. Martinez, emerged from his office, frowning at the unauthorized display. But before he could intervene, Ms. Williams stepped forward. "This," she announced, her voice carrying across the courtyard, "is what education should look like. Not just numbers or words or facts in isolation, but the beautiful integration of all human knowledge." A murmur of agreement. NT rippled through the crowd. More teachers appeared, drawn by the commotion. The physics teacher stopped at a piece, showing the golden ratio expressed through natural patterns. The music instructor studied the mathematical structures underlying Tom's compositions. "Where is he?" someone called out. Jake checked his watch. According to plan, Tom was waiting with Mike at the park entrance, ready for the signal. But as Jake reached for his phone to text them, a familiar squawk cut through the morning air. Pip, the blue and yellow harbinger who had started it all, soared over the courtyard. Students gasped and pointed as the parrot circled once, then landed on one of the easels. But this time, instead of revealing secrets, he simply waited. Tom appeared at the courtyard entrance, guitar slung across his back, Mike at his side. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path. For a moment, Tom hesitated, his eyes scanning the faces turned toward him. Then Lucy stepped forward, followed by Jake, and together they walked with him through the crowd. "Look at this one," someone said, pointing to a piece that showed the school building reimagined as a fusion of organic and geometric forms. "It's like he sees a whole different world layered over ours." "That's because he does." Jake spoke up, his debate team confidence carrying his voice. "And maybe if we all stopped trying so hard to fit into our assigned boxes, we'd see those other layers too." The crowd's attention shifted as a woman in hospital scrubs rushed into the courtyard, Tom's mother. Moments later, a man in a business suit appeared from the opposite direction, his father. They stopped short, taking in the display of their son's talent. Tom stood straighter, gripping the strap of his guitar. The moment he'd been both dreading and wanting had arrived. But before he could speak, his mother moved closer to one of the drawings. A piece showing a bridge that seemed to grow from the earth itself, its support structures following the patterns of tree branches. "This is..." She touched the drawing gently. "This is your design for the river crossing project." Tom nodded. "Engineering principles applied through natural patterns. It's actually more structurally sound than traditional designs because it works with the landscape instead of against it." His father had moved to examine the mathematical equations woven into a musical score. These formulas, they're advanced structural calculations, but expressed through rhythm and harmony. Because they're the same thing, Tom said quietly but firmly. Music, math, art, science, they're all just different languages describing the same universal patterns. I can't be just one or the other. I need all of them to say what I see. The courtyard fell silent as Tom's parents looked at each other, then at their son. The moment stretched, filled with the weight of years of expectations and unspoken fears. Then Tom's mother stepped forward and did something that surprised everyone. She smiled. "Show us," she said simply. "Show us what you see." Tom took a deep breath, looking at the faces surrounding him. His parents, his classmates, teachers, and the new friends who had helped him find his voice. He unslipped his guitar from his shoulder and sat down on one of the courtyard benches. "I wrote this piece while thinking about the golden ratio," he began, his fingers finding their positions on the strings. "It's the same pattern that appears in seashells, galaxies, and the way trees branch. But it's also the foundation of classical architecture and engineering." As he began to play, Maya and her crew adjusted the speakers to provide subtle accompaniment. The melody started simply, a mathematical progression that could have been plotted on graph paper. But then it began to evolve, each iteration adding layers of complexity and emotion while maintaining its structural core. Jake watched Tom's parents as they listened. The rigid set of his father's shoulders gradually softened, and his mother's hand found her husband's, squeezing it gently. Around them, students who had never given Tom a second glance stood transfixed, seeing for the first time the person who had been invisible among them for so long. The music built to a crescendo that somehow managed to sound both precisely calculated and deeply passionate. As the final notes faded, echoing off the school buildings, Tom set his guitar aside and stood. "That's just one way I see things," he said, his voice stronger now. "But there are others." He walked to the newest piece he'd created, the mural from the park, which Maya's group had photographed and printed on large panels overnight. "This is our town, but it's also more than that. It's about how everything is connected when you look closely enough." He traced the lines where mechanical drawings transformed into organic shapes. "Dad, remember when you taught me about load-bearing structures? How every beam and support has to work in perfect harmony. That's exactly what I'm doing with art, finding the harmony between different ways of seeing the world." His father stepped closer, examining the technical aspects hidden within the artistic flourishes. "These support calculations, they're actually correct, and the way you've integrated them into the aesthetic design is beautiful," his mother finished, joining them. "But Tom, why didn't you tell us? Why did you feel you had to hide?" Tom looked at Lucy, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Because I thought I had to choose. Be the engineer you wanted, Dad, or the artist I felt inside. It took me until now to realize I don't have to pick just one part of myself." Pip, still perched on the easel, let out a soft squawk that sounded almost approving. The parrot's presence seemed to remind everyone of how this had all started, with hidden truths finally spoken aloud. Ms. Williams stepped forward, addressing Tom's parents. "Your son has an extraordinary gift, not just for art or music or mathematics, but for seeing how they're all interconnected. That's incredibly rare and valuable." Dr. Martinez nodded in agreement. "There are university programs specifically designed for students who can bridge these disciplines. Architecture, design engineering, acoustic engineering, fields that require both technical precision and creative vision." Tom's father loosened his tie slightly, a gesture that seemed to symbolize the relaxing of years of rigid expectations. "I always said I wanted you to build something meaningful with your life. I had a very narrow view of what that could look like. And I worried about your future," his mother added softly, "about whether you could support yourself with art. But this," she gestured to the display around them, "this isn't just art. This is innovation." Tom's eyes were bright as he looked between them. "So you understand why I can't just be one thing?" His father placed a hand on his shoulder, not the stern grip of authority, but the gentle touch of understanding. "We're beginning to," and he glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. "We want to learn more." to see what you see, if you're willing to show us." The tension that had lived in Tom's shoulders for years finally released. He turned to Jake and Lucy, who had stood quietly, supporting him through it all. "Thank you," he said simply, "for finding me, for helping me find myself." The morning bell rang, but nobody moved toward their classes. They all sensed that something significant was still unfolding, not just for Tom and his family, but for everyone who had witnessed this moment of truth and transformation. Pip spread his wings and launched himself from the easel, circling the courtyard once more before landing on Tom's shoulder. This time, the parrot didn't need to speak any secrets. The truth was already out in the open, painted across the morning air in colors everyone could finally see. As the morning Sioux climbed higher over Maplewood High, Dr. Martinez finally stepped forward to address the gathered crowd. "I think," he announced, looking at his watch with a slight smile, "we can consider this morning's first period an impromptu assembly on interdisciplinary education." A relieved laugh rippled through the students. Tom still stood with his parents, but something had shifted in his posture. The weight of hiding, of trying to be just one version of himself, had lifted visibly from his shoulders. Jake watched as students who had never spoken to Tom before approached him, asking about specific pieces or commenting on his music. The barriers that had kept everyone in their designated social circles seemed to have temporarily dissolved. Then Ms. Williams cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Tom's confession through Pip yesterday made me realize something I've kept hidden too long." She paused, looking around at her students. 20 years ago, I was in Tom's position. I loved both art and engineering, but I let others convince me I had to choose. I chose the safe path, became an art teacher instead of pursuing my dream of architectural design. Her words hung in the air, heavy with years of regret and understanding. But watching Tom today, seeing him brave enough to be his whole self, she straightened her shoulders. "I've enrolled in an evening master's program in architectural visualization, because it's never too late to embrace all parts of who you are." Tom's mother wiped her eyes, then turned to her son. "I need to get back to my shift at the hospital, but tonight we'll talk. Really talk. About your future, about programs that could nurture both sides of your talent. And I'll cancel my next conference," his father added. "I want to see more of your work, understand how you're combining these disciplines. Maybe," he smiled slightly, "you could even teach me a few things about seeing the world differently." As Tom's parents left, promising deeper conversations to come, Jake noticed Lucy standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching everything with quiet intensity. He walked over to her. "You okay?" Lucy adjusted her glasses, a habit Jake now recognized as her gathering courage. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about being real instead of what everyone expects." She pulled out her phone, showing him a text she'd drafted to her parents. "I want to join the debate team. Really join, not just sit in the back. My parents always said women should be quiet, but you have things to say," Jake finished for her. "Important things." She nodded, then pressed send before she could change her mind. The crowd in the courtyard had begun to disperse as students headed to their delayed classes. Tom was surrounded by Maya's artist group, discussing plans for more collaborative projects that would bridge the gap between technical precision and creative expression. Pip, still perched on Tom's shoulder, suddenly spread his wings and launched himself into the air. But instead of flying away, he circled once and landed on the central fountain. The parrot that had started everything by revealing secrets now seemed content to simply watch. "I just wanted to be myself," Tom said quietly as Jake and Lucy rejoined him. "I never expected it would help others do the same." "That's the thing about truth," Jake replied, thinking about his own journey over the past day. "It has a way of inspiring more truth." Ms. Williams approached them one last time. "You know what the most beautiful part of this is? It's not just about art and science anymore. It's about all the walls we build between different parts of ourselves. The labels we accept because they're easier than being complex, messy, real human beings." She gestured to the courtyard where small groups of students still lingered, looking at Tom's artwork. The usual social boundaries had dissolved. Athletes chatted with art students, Mike overachievers mingled with musicians, and nobody seemed to remember why they'd kept themselves so carefully separated before. "Remember what Pip first said?" Lucy asked softly. "I just want to be me." Turns out a lot of us were waiting for permission to say the same thing. Speaking of which, Tom pointed upward with a grin. They all looked up to see Pip soaring one last time over the school before heading back toward the pet shop, his work as catalyst apparently complete. But his message would remain, that authenticity isn't about fitting into prescribed roles or choosing between different parts of yourself. It's about having the courage to be whole, even when that means redrawing the boundaries others have set for you. As they finally headed to their classes, Jake looked back at the courtyard, at the art that had sparked change, at the people who had found their voices, at the spaces between categories where real life actually happens. Sometimes, he realized, it takes a parrot's indiscretion to remind us of our most basic truth. That we are all, in our own ways, both more and less than the labels we wear. And that's exactly as it should be. The bell rang again. But this time it sounded less like a signal to conform and more like an invitation to continue discovering who they really were, one honest moment at a time.